Jesus didn't have a problem with people that's in the streets. He had a problem with religious people.
How can I help anybody when I was not even able to help my own son?
I would never do that. And I became that in a matter of minutes when they took my pain pills away.
And I said, I'm not where I want to be, but thank God I'm not what I used to be.
This is Faith in Your Recovery. I am Randy Davis. Welcome to the battle. Welcome to Season 2 of Faith in Your Recovery. When you're sick and tired of being sick and tired, we're here for you, and we want to be with you. We get the struggle. We get the challenge. We get the stigma, that sense of loss. So whether we're your first choice or your last chance, we don't care, and we hope you don't. We're just glad you're part of our audience. We want to do the best we can do to make a difference, to lift you up, to help you find a better life. I'm your host, Randy Davis, a retired pastor, founder and executive director of A Better Life, Brianna's Hope. We're a participant-driven, faith-based, compassion-filled support and recovery movement for those battling the battle with substance use disorder/addiction. Have a couple of guests today. First off, from the healthy communities of Clinton County, Lorra Archibald. Welcome, Lorra.
Hello, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. Glad to have you with us. Thanks for sharing your time today and being ready to offer to the folks some hope, some help, some options, and some promise for their future. Why don't you give us a little story of what your life looks like, what you're about, how you're involved with the recovery community, and we'll move forward from there. So please share with us.
I would love to do that. So I'm a nurse by trade and worked in nursing for 23 years. And part of that time was in rehab. And while I was working as a nurse, I just kept seeing the outcomes of chronic health conditions. And a lot of times that was related to things like substance use disorder. And so at some point I decided that I really wanted to change career paths and get in on the prevention side. And that led me to my journey to Healthy Communities. And so I went to Healthy Communities of Clinton County 9 years ago. And now I've become the executive director. And really just in the last few years have we really started concentrating on addiction services. During COVID, we know that need became greater than ever. And we had been doing some small things prior to COVID, but with COVID and the increase in overdose rates, the increase in usage, we decided that it was going to become a primary focus area for us. And so at Healthy Communities, we do a lot of prevention work in the schools, but we also implemented a peer recovery coach program and a system of care program, and then kind of built off of those two programs to have kind of a community-wide recovery system for the people living in our community.
So you made a statement there that just over the last few years have you changed your focus, your concentration to deal more with that substance use disorder. How many years ago was that, Laura? Past, 3 or 4 years kind of thing?
Yeah, really in the midst of COVID, we saw the increased need with mental health and substance use. Those were the two crisis areas that we were getting the most calls for during COVID, and seeing the biggest need for helping people. And so really in the middle of the COVID crisis is kind of where we started changing our focus a little bit and concentrating more on mental health and the substance use field than we had prior.
I am so thankful for you throwing in those two words, mental health, because too many times we separate addiction/substance use disorder from mental health. And I think where there's where there's addiction, there's mental health, not necessarily where there's mental health issues, there's addiction. But that overlap and everything that goes with that creates a greater struggle for that individual who's battling that. Yes?
Absolutely. I mean, I would say the majority of people that we work with who are struggling with addiction have what we consider dual diagnosis, and that they suffer from a mental health disorder and substance use disorder. And, you know, really you have to get help for both to sustain long-term recovery. And that's really the ultimate goal.
And then they're dealing with that stigma and bias from society that settles on top of all of that, makes it a little harder to want to start going through those layers, right?
Absolutely. And I think that's probably where our community has made the greatest strides. Is I feel like Frankfort and Clinton County, Indiana has just really embraced our recovery community, and we have just done a really nice job of decreasing that stigma and really introducing the concept that people living in long-term recovery are an asset to your community. And, you know, getting our people living in recovery out and about in the community active has been super important. And one of the key people to making that happen has been one of my peer recovery coaches, and his name is Chris Ward, and he's on this call with us today.
Welcome, Chris. We appreciate your willingness to join us, and tell us a little bit of your story, where you're at today, and then we're going to go back and kind of rehash things from the beginning, what led you into your struggles and how you were able to survive them and move beyond them to the point where you're at today.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. So, as Miss Laura said, my name is Chris Ward. I'm currently a peer recovery coach here with Healthy Communities of Clinton County here in Frankfort, Indiana. And so I'm in recovery myself. So February 24th in 23, it'll be 7 years that I've been able to stay sober and work on my recovery. So, yeah, I was an Army guy for 7 years, and then was injured and in war, and that led to an awful lot of rehab in the hospital. And so in that process, I got just insanely addicted to opiate pain medication, and that was right around the time when they started the FDA started implementing more control mechanisms to
much needed.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. So unfortunately, the progression of oftentimes with opiate addicts, they when we can't get the opiate pain medication, that then unfortunately leads to a heroin addiction. And so I'd struggled with the heroin addiction for several years after that. So I was able to find recovery, my path to recovery, and through the way was I had a chance encounter with Miss Laura, and the rest is history.
Awesome. Prior to your military service, and thank you for your service, we salute that here at Faith in Your Recovery, and I do as well. I'm a veteran myself, and I take pride in that. I could hear some of that in you, even with the struggles it created. But prior to your military service, did you have any battle with addiction of any type, or was that?
I did not.
Okay.
I absolutely did not. And I mean, you can talk to my mama and daddy, and I was a pretty squeaky clean kid. I didn't really get in much trouble or anything like that. That's why this was such a colossal surprise to my family. They had no exposure to addiction, whether it be substance use disorder, alcohol use disorder. They just had no experience with addiction. I didn't know what addiction was. I had never taken a opiate pain medication prior to that. So Yeah, this was just unfortunately it was just being on opiate pain medication for 13 months in a hospital trying to manage post-operative pain. So,
wow. So that was were you in the hospital 13 months or on the medication for 13?
I was in the hospital for 13 months recovering from 23 surgeries. So I was inpatient for 13 months.
So could we ask, what was the injury and how did it come about?
Absolutely. So, on our last deployment to Iraq, our truck hit an IED and we were ambushed, and so that led to. Thankfully, we had sandbags in the floorboard. That's a funny story in and of itself. We were almost too lazy to fill the sandbags the night prior, but we were afraid that our company commander would come do spot checks down at our fob, and so. We reluctantly filled sandbags with and aligned the floorboards of each vehicle because we were receiving information that these types of IED attacks was starting. So we reluctantly did that the night before, and then as fate would hold it, we hit an IED the next morning, and so what that did was it sent shrapnel up. We were very fortunate because, again, had we not filled them sandbags, I'm not real sure I'd be on this call right now. But so what it did was it slowed down a whole lot of shrapnel, but still some went through my feet. My first and fifth metatarsal and my right foot was blown completely out, and so I've just got a whole lot of hardware in my legs and feet in particular.
I have never heard. Now, I precede you a little bit. I was in the service back during Vietnam. I was not in Vietnam. My brother was. So at that time, they weren't going to send us both there. But I had never heard the story of the sandbags for the floorboard and all. And that's just to lessen the blow, yes?
Yes, sir. So we weren't we had armored vehicles, but not all of our vehicles were armored. So like the Humvees weren't armored at that point. Only like Stryker vehicles and things like that we would take actually into battle. And so to mitigate any type of damage associated with IEDs that was happening all over the country at that point, we were told to layer our floorboards with sandbags, and it ended up being an obvious blessing.
So your armor was sand in that respect. Wow.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing that. And so I get the idea you're in the hospital, you're dealing with the pain, and I can't imagine what that must have been. And so it's 13 months of it, and obviously it got a hold of you at that time. So remind us again of how you moved from the pills to, your other drugs of that moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hadn't even been on pills that entire 13 months. I was on a drip. And so it was just liquid. It was in it was in an IV. So when I had moved out, when I was discharged from the hospital, I went to another facility. And that was the first time that I was given a bottle of pills. And the expectation was that I was able to manage that prescription and all that. So the pills seemed to be working. I didn't experience any significant withdrawal symptoms or anything like that. But what I did notice was as I got to the end of that first bottle, it was a Friday, and I knew that the staff was gone on the weekend. And I noticed that my pills were running pretty low in that bottle, and I started to perhaps now I can label it as a panic attack, but I wasn't sure what it was. I was getting a whole lot of anxiety. I was getting super anxious, and so that was I'd called my mama and I explained to her, what was going on, and she said, "I think you might be addicted, honey." And I said, "No, that's craziness. I'm a soldier, and there's no way I'm addicted." Well, I think that was the first inkling that that there was an issue, and so it didn't take long on that bottle. I took them as I was prescribed for the first couple of refills, and then I realized that if I took the bottle said to take one every so many hours, but I realized quickly that if I took more than that, if I took two, number one, I felt really good. I felt euphoric and warm and fuzzy, but something else, it allowed me to sleep. I didn't have these gnarly nightmares. I didn't have, I just wasn't just a ball of anxiety. So it almost was like a miracle drug to me, right? So, and I didn't see anything wrong with it because it's a prescribed medication. This isn't drugs. We're not talking heroin. We're not talking, I was naive, and so I had started over indulging, if you will, to mitigate the symptoms of maybe some mental health issues. But I was an Army Ranger, so I was too tough. There's no way that I was weak enough to have mental illness, which that was just completely irrational. So anyhow, I just began taking more, and obviously, as we know with opiates, you got to take more and more because you start to grow a tolerance and obvious dependence. So it stopped fairly quickly becoming fun. It wasn't fun after 4 or 5 months. At that point, it was maintenance. I had to take 5 to stay okay instead of taking 1. And I was able to be devious. I was in active addiction. We're master manipulators, right? We learn to get what we need, and so I knew relatively quickly that if I ran out of my prescription faster than I was supposed to, I could talk that away, and that I was in significant pain. And if you don't believe me, take an X-ray, and they would. And oh my goodness, yes, I bet you're in pain. So I would just play on provider sympathy and things like that. And around 2011, 2012, they introduced this system where I couldn't doctor shop anymore. In essence, there was a system in place that told one doctor that I was already on narcotics from a different doctor. Therefore, they wouldn't prescribe me any more opiates. And so that was once that system was rolled out, it became very much more difficult to get what I needed at the volume of which I needed it. So so I'm embarrassed still, but I had heard about I was buying opiate pain medication off the streets as well. So I had dealings with drug dealers every day. But then I had heard when they didn't have opiate pain medication, they would always offer me heroin, and I was not. I reinforced the stigma more than anyone in saying, no, I'm not a junkie. I'm not going to get on heroin. Like, that's for drug addicts. I'm not a drug addict. And then for whatever reason, I was extremely sick one day. I remember it very clear and vividly. I was sick one day, and I was sick from opiate withdrawal, and I went and I decided to try a little bit of heroin, and oh my goodness, it was everything that the pain pills were and more. Like, it was great. It made me feel well again, and even dare I say good. And so the same thing happened with the heroin. I would do it and do it and do it, and then before long, it wasn't about fun anymore. It was back to maintenance. Yeah.
So how long were you on heroin?
I was on solely heroin for 3 years, but I had dabbled in, like, that first time that I had taken it. I was still taking pills. I would just use heroin as a supplement, like in between. If I had I had ridiculous amounts opiate medication. So they would give me like 240 of some pretty strong pain pills, and I would take those, in a couple of weeks instead of 30 days. So then I would use the heroin for the next 2 weeks to get through until my next prescription was available. So I did those. I mean, I was on shenanigan status that whole time, but I would say just primarily heroin. I would say the last 3 years of my addiction.
Okay. What? I'm not even sure how to ask this, Chris, but how did you convince yourself this is okay at that time? Because it eliminated the pain and the discomfort? Was that it? Or did you know at the time you were lying to yourself?
No. I was always rational enough to know that I was just lying to myself. I was never okay with this. Let me be clear. So for the first 4 years of my addiction, my wife didn't even know I was addicted to anything. So, I when I say I was a master manipulator, I was as good as it got. I was never okay. I always felt dirty. I always felt, there's a range of emotions, because when you're, you're a military guy yourself, sir. So, there's a sense of pride that comes with that. And then when you find yourself waiting in an alley with your kids sleeping in your back seat, waiting for a drug dealer to meet you in a very sketchy location, you start to question, what am I doing? And unfortunately, that didn't ever, even those situations in particular weren't enough to get me help.
Okay.
To get me to the point where I needed to get clean.
So was there any incarceration due to drug usage or, selling or buying in any way during your struggles?
Yeah, so there was no incarceration during my struggle because of medication or anything like that. But so it all kind of came to a head one day. So I had decided that my family would probably be best if I weren't here, because I was just, at this point, I was creating a whole lot of havoc and stress for my family. My daddy had to retire, or he felt like he had to retire from his work because the people was talking about the things I was doing. I was stealing from anybody I knew. So it had just got to the point where I had decided that I'd put them through enough pain, and so I had decided I was going to rob a place, particularly a pharmacy, and I was going to take a whole bunch of pain pills, and I was going to wait for the police to come, and I was just going to show them my gun and have them shoot me. I decided to go through with that plan here in Frankfurt. That's what actually brought me to Frankfurt. That's why I'm here. That's why it'll be hard for me to ever leave Frankfurt, because I feel indebted to this community. I went into a CVS here and I shot the place up. I robbed it. I took all of their pain medication. I went out and sit on the hood of my vehicle, waiting on the police to come to shoot me. The problem was they didn't come, and they were going by at high rates of speed with lights and sirens and everything. Couldn't figure out what was going on. I got scared. I called my mama, and she begged me not to go through with it. She begged me to turn myself in. It ended up they went to the wrong CVS. So the police department went to a CVS that I wasn't at, but the pharmacist there was telling them I wasn't there, but they're thinking that I've got a gun to his head. So I ended up turning myself in and surviving that ordeal. But yes, that came with incarceration and a whole lot of house arrest to follow. So
how long were you? Go ahead.
So that's actually why I'm here now. I was in prison for 3 years, and then I got released on home detention. And so while on the community corrections program, I was receiving a lot of treatment from the VA in Danville, Illinois. And then so each time that a veteran would sign on to the community corrections program here in Frankfurt, they would call me down and ask me to talk to them. Just kind of introduce myself to them as a point of contact, but also kind of introduce them to specific resources available for people struggling with substance use disorder through the VA. And then that led to the chance encounter with Lorra, who then allowed me an actual job to get paid to do it.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, Lorra, let's get you back in this game here. What was it like? What was it like when Chris came to you there at that point in his life, in the middle of that struggle and, trying to determine the next best step, it sounds like? Tell us what some of those moments early on were like.
So by the time he came to Healthy Communities, he was in long-term recovery. And it was interesting. Sometimes you just click with people. And Chris by far was the longest interview I ever had in my life with someone. And he was open and honest and told me his story. And, we talked in depth, and we had this passion for our community in common. And we both have this great need to help people. And so, we just clicked right away, and I knew that I needed him on my team. And so we talked about him going to the peer recovery classes. And he did that and got his certification to be a peer recovery coach. And really the rest is history. And, he has just done an amazing job, not just as a peer recovery coach, but kind of being the face of recovery for our community and getting other people to understand why it is so important to give people a chance, to give them a second chance, a third chance, sometimes a 10th chance, because people can and do recover, and there's hope, and they become valuable members of our community. And they see Chris out there doing all this wonderful work. They see him helping people, and it's a good symbol for them to realize that people living in long-term recovery are an asset. And we want that message out in our community. And I think that they've really embraced that in our community as a whole.
Yeah. And nobody's going to get long-term without being short-term first. And they've got to have that opportunity. They've got to have that grace, that forgiveness, to where somebody steps up and says, I see potential. I see hope in you, and I'm going to be here with you until you see it in yourself. And
absolutely,
I think every community, and that is the way my program that God's blessed me with got started. A young lady from our community going to a party, disappearing for 10 weeks before her body was found. That became a face that our community couldn't deny. That wasn't as positive, but what has come from it, she has changed the lives of thousands of people around Indiana, Ohio, and we're in South Carolina and Virginia as well. And I know some of those folks, and please don't anybody be offended by this, but back in my day, they would have posters of certain people who struggled, who had overcome it. We have our poster pictures there at home of people who have found the path to a better life and have found the hope that they want to have. And I can visualize Chris as being one of those people in the community. We've been blessed to go to different schools. We have a couple, 3 or 4 people that are so well known in a multi-county area. When they show up, you just see people smile. And I'm going to believe that he's one of those as well, that he has shown others, he's proving it on a daily basis, and we all know that it's not complete. This is a journey, it's not a destination. but he stays above it all and gives folks that hope and gives you someone to point toward that you can get there as well.
Exactly. And it is, hope. And that's the message that we try to give people over and over and over. And, Chris and I both know relapse is part of recovery. It is. And,
yes.
And when people relapse, it's important that they have this support group around them and they feel like they can reach out and they can be honest, but giving them that vision of hope of what their life can be like in long-term recovery. That's the message that's important. That's the thing that we really try to do. And, we've done lots of things and we listen to our people in recovery and we try to give them the things that they need, the tools that they need in their tool belt.
Yes.
To lessen their struggles. And, we talk a lot. Chris and I are both big on this. It's a hand up, not a hand out.
Exactly. Love that. Yes.
We try to teach them the skills that they need to have long-term recovery. And, it's been really important. We've worked really hard at getting, listening to what our people, our clients say. One of the things that seems minimalistic, but it's not, is we kept hearing them say, we need sober activities to do with sober people. And that seems like a really small thing to people who don't understand, but it's not a small thing. They need to be able to replace bad habits with good, healthy things to do. And they need to do it with sober people. And so that's been one of the things that we've really concentrated on this year is getting some healthy, sober activities for people to do in safe environments. And those efforts are really going well. Chris has really spearheaded having our people in recovery out there volunteering in the community, working side by side with our mayor, the police officers, corrections, probation, and having them all work together as a team at things like food pantries and things. So that people are working side by side with people who arrested them in the past or whatever. And so, it's been really nice to bridge those gaps and really help decrease the stigma around substance use disorder.
We do recover. It takes a community. Nobody has ever said it will be easy, but I've yet to meet someone in recovery that has said it's not worth it. We know that it is because we see it daily. We see that struggler become someone who is successful and of value and worth in their own eyes. And when that light comes on, bar the door because they're going to run forward and share it with somebody else. Love to see the infectious aspect of recovery. So, Chris, tell the folks a little about your life as a peer recovery coach, because I'm sure we have some audience out there who doesn't truly know what a peer recovery coach is about. The role they play, the outreach they offer, the resource they can be. So share that.
Yes, sir. Everything you just said. A peer recovery coach, this model hasn't been around for a long time, but it is insanely effective. We, as peers, we've been there. We've been in the throes of addiction. We've walked it. We've been able to overcome that. So and to reach long-term recovery. And so our job is quite simply to be motivators, to be cheerleaders. We're allies. We're confidants. We're also truth tellers, though. We're honest. We don't tend to sugarcoat things because that doesn't help anyone. We're role models, right? So I'll show you my life as an example.
It's hard to manipulate. It's hard to manipulate a master manipulator. Correct?
I'm going to tell you, we've got that exact exact feedback verbatim. The reason that this program is effective is that it's hard to manipulate a manipulator. So, but we're also resource brokers, right? We're engaged in not just our community, but surrounding communities as well. So we can better link our clients, our recoveries up with resources needed. We're advocates. We testify on behalf of our clients as character witnesses in court trials. We submit letters to judges based on a client's participation in our program. We're community organizers. Miss Lorra, she's kind and in what she says, but that's our job. Our community engagement. That's kind of our job, right? So, as people in active addiction, dealing with substance use disorder, our contact with police, law enforcement, probation, parole, corrections, all of those types of people generally aren't good contacts, right? So there's this inherent stress and anxiety associated with any contact with law enforcement sometimes, and so
for all
it's
of us,
important that we. Oh, absolutely. It's important that we marry these individuals up for positive contact, right? So that we can normalize contact with law enforcement from people who are living in recovery, who are new to recovery, or striving to be in recovery. And so we do things like food pantries and things like that, where we'll work alongside the mayor, the chief of police, the leadership at the police department, so that they can get to know us a little bit better, and in that reduce the stigma, so to speak. But
yes.
Also, when we work alongside our corrections officers, our probation officers, it allows them to see that we're not just a client for them, but we're also people, right? We have feelings. We're sometimes funny, and so I would like to think that sometimes contacts like that just breed a little bit more leniency, maybe more.
Well, I'm of the total belief we also have a stigma and a bias against law enforcement most of the time, especially if they're the one that's chasing us doing 70 and 55, okay? And we've got to bridge that gap as well. So, Chris, here's what I'd like for you to do. Take the next couple of minutes here and share with us. I know that's a brief sharing, your recovery journey. I know no two journeys are the same. Just kind of sum it up in a couple of minutes here, please.
Absolutely. So it is definitely a God thing. How I got to healthy communities, the chance encounters and whatnot. So as it would turn out, our director of operations worked for the attorney who was representing me in the robbery case, and I didn't know that because I was too delusional at that point in time to recognize who she was. Once I realized that, it was definitely a God moment. So now she's my director of operations, but she was responsible for contacting the Veteran Affairs over in Danville, Illinois, and getting me signed up for a long-term. This is going to be a long. It's called the PRRTP, or the Psychosocial Residential Rehabilitation Treatment Program. So that's just the VA's long way or long description of a dual diagnosis recovery center that deals with PTSD and then substance use disorder simultaneously. So our director of operations got me over there, and so I started the 9-month program. It took 2 visits to the mental health clinic for post-traumatic stress disorder to change my life completely, and that allowed the ball to roll on my substance use disorder treatment. So once I realized that I wasn't less of a man, I didn't have to. I didn't have to carry this John Wayne manly coat of. But instead, I was able to be vulnerable for a couple of sessions, and it just completely changed my life. And so then it got to just be, I learned cognitive behavioral therapy, several other therapies, such as prolonged exposure, things like that. But I basically just learned that I needed to consistently prioritize my long-term best interest over my short-term gratification, right? So as long as I kept that as a forefront of my mind, is this in my long-term best interest? It has that mentality has played a critical role in keeping me in long-term recovery. So I just to be honest with you, my recovery consists of helping other people in this role specifically, but also just making sure that every day I'm just consistently prioritizing my long-term best interest over any type of short-term gratification that any substance would give me.
You sound like you're a sponge that's soaking up everything that can make you successful and wringing it out on others around you. Thank you for that. Here's a final question for you, Chris. The title of our podcast is Faith in Your Recovery. Tell us what that means to you in about 30 seconds.
It means John 3:30. It means that he must become greater and I must become less. It means being completely and totally open to guidance spiritually.
Wow. You can't say it much better than that. The scripture fits it perfectly. And when I say fits it, fits your story, fits my story, and the bottom line is everybody else's. It may not become our battle cry, but it needs to be in there. So, Chris, thank you. Thank you for joining us here today on Faith in Your Recovery. Laura, thank you. Laura, I want to challenge you as well. Go ahead and give us your definition of the words faith in your recovery.
I think faith in your recovery is finding your path, however you find it, whenever you find it. Having faith that there will be God, there will be support people, there will be a community surrounding you with support if you allow it.
Love that. We like to use the idea that you've got to have faith in yourself, faith in your community, faith in your recovery, and above all, faith in God. That certainly doesn't make it the only definition, but that's pretty parallel to what you had to say there. I thank you both for your time, for your willingness, and for the work that you're doing in your community. We have a chapter there at St. Matthew United Methodist Church of A Better Life, Brianna's Hope, that they're doing great things. I get a lot of feedback from what happens in Frankfort. You guys are becoming somewhat of a poster group, a poster community for recovery. Keep it up.
They are doing a great job. They just had their 2-year anniversary and having between 50 and 60 people every week. It's amazing. It's amazing.
That's where your community's at. We're thankful to be a part of it. I'm thankful to have spent this time with both of you. Folks, thanks for joining us today. Continue to tune in and to follow us. You can get us on your favorite podcast platform. We're also on 100.9 radio out of Portland, Indiana. You can get that on the internet Sunday mornings at 7:45 a.m. Or you can contact us at podcast@ablbh.org. We invite you to subscribe to the podcast, to like it, to share it, and above all, remember, don't give up on yourself, don't give up on others, and don't give in to the urge. Your answer, your healing, your recovery may be just around the corner, or who knows, in our next episode. Continue. Stay in the battle. Keep fighting. We believe in you, and so does God. Thank you. God bless. Amen.